Thank you for looking at our Thank you for looking at our live stream. I hope you'll join the group. The purpose of this live stream is to publicize and hopefully work towards bringing back the culture of an American Yank. We have our own lingo. We use our own strategy. We have our own words. The priest and the pimp. The priest is on one side and the pimp is on the other, and that represents the classic battle of good and evil. The gal who changes the dirty diapers, she gets the sex and she gets the romance and she gets the house and the movies made about her and the songs sung about her, which represents the idea of original sin. It spills over into home economics, and it's home economics that brought everybody out of poverty and into plenty. It's what uh, gave the United States such a huge middle class. And so we're turning to you. We'll hope you're the normal, you're the single mom, and you have children looking up to you, and they to provide stability and food and clothing and all the things they need. And you're working ungodly hours, and it's just not going to work out. It's just not going to work out. That's all there is to it. And so you have to do something. If you'll speak up, then we can do something. And if you're a man and you have a girlfriend, and you're trying to support them in what used to be called a traditional household, and then you realize not only you can't do that, but you could work not just 40 hours, but 80 hours or even twice that. It's not going to work out. And it's not going to work out. You used to be called a good citizen and a Yank and a good provider, and then you were called a white male chauvinist pig, and now you're called a peon. You're in the peasant class. You could work ungodly hours. It's not going to work out. And so you would speak up and show us how many hours you have to work. You don't say how much money do you make, but rather how many hours you'd have to work in order to be a good provider, in order to come up with a mortgage for a house and a car and food and clothing and health insurance and a recreational budget for you to. They used to make a big deal about talking about what the United States was going to do with all this recreational time. They don't do that anymore. You're either in the upper class or you're a peon in the peasant class, and you'll just have to speak up. If you do, then we can do something about it. We can go back to home economics. And so if you're listening to this, please pass the word. We've been doing this for a couple of weeks now. We have a YouTube, we have a YouTube channel, The Priest and the Pimp, and another one. We're going to try and consolidate them. And we have a Facebook, Time to Act, and an Instagram, and we're going with the same title. And if you would join one of those groups and speak up, then we can do something about it. It all has to come from you. Just as a reminder, the Communist Party came out in the 1950s, and then they said they would overthrow the United States government by the early 70s. Rather specific about that. And in the early 70s, there was a profound change in our society. That's what you have to go back and look at. That's when everything changed. In psychology, they threw out the idea of being a normal, well-adjusted person. Both the Catholic and the Communist find mental illness as a normal taken into the abnormal, from a cold to the flu to pneumonia. The Catholics say, hold on, go back to the normal. The normal is normal, but not good enough. Without sounding too earthy, sit in a chair and fantasize about the gals until you become sexually aroused. Open your eyes, look around the room, do it again, only this time you're fantasizing about actually getting the gal pregnant. And there you go, with a snap of a finger, you realize that that's not a natural thing, and it's a true thing, but not a natural thing. And now you understand what original sin is. It goes on from there. Do the same with fear, and the environment will change your attitude. And so what takes away your free will? Fear, sex, ignorance, and violence. And so we'll intentionally straighten ourselves up emotionally. We'll intentionally place those thoughts in our mind that have to do with sex, that have to do with getting a gal pregnant, even though that's not a natural thing. And even though, just like a baseball player, you'll only bat about 300. If we use our story, if we add that to the story of the priest and the pimp, there's a priest on one side and he says, say what you mean and mean what you say. Everything else comes from evil. Then you draw a line and there's a flip-flop, and that flip-flop is original sin. You go out to the other side, and at the other side there's a pimp, and the pimp knows how to manipulate, intimidate, hustle, and con. Do that again, uh, only this time you close your eyes without sounding how it's going to. You close your eyes, you fantasize about the gals until you start to become sexually aroused, and then this time you separate the act of sex from the act of getting the gal pregnant. And you can start to see yourself go from the normal to the abnormal. And then you talk about the routines that a pimp uses to recruit a prostitute. And you'll start using phrases like, they're a bunch of queer scoundrels, and that sort of thing. And that's about as polite as it gets. Malice is what that's called. Here we'll call that malice. They don't call themselves malice, they call themselves a class of intelligentsia. And they do the things that people in that group do. When it comes to economics, they adopt home economics. They move into the foothills and they become professional consumers. And everybody else is in the valley and they do all the consuming. And in fact, if there is no God, if Christ didn't rise on the third day, well, that's it. That's the highest standard of living you can have. To be a psychopathic, not doing all the consuming and everybody else doing all the producing. And to go in the other direction, the priest who takes a vow of poverty maximizes profits. They'll never be lived. They'll have the leadership style of washing the feet of the apostles. They say on that EWTN. And so the criminal trial attorney that defends the poor and the oppressed, he might live in a doctor's or lawyer's house, but he'll never be a tax attorney or real estate attorney living in the foothills collecting rent from everybody. If you do away with that upper class, you'll also do away with that class of poverty. And you'll have our criminal trial attorney that we were talking about. And he'll live at a doctor's, lawyer's house. He'll take Wednesdays off, and he'll play in that silly tennis tournament they have every year. And I insist on it. I insist on it at the point of a gun. It's an unnatural thing. It's a very unnatural thing. When you think about it, Christ took the most violent position he could. He thrust into hell people who hustle, con, manipulate, and intimidate people. And he was so empathetic, he raised people from the dead. And that's very much an unnatural thing. That's how you get a normal supply and demand curve. That's how you become normal and well-adjusted. And you realize being normal and well-adjusted is a religious shtick. It's a Catholic shtick. It comes out of popes, monks, and monasteries, and that sort of thing. You could get away with saying, well, they're just a bunch of, the Catholic Church is just a bunch of university professors, and they made it up. And the answer to that would be, well, you should have walked, talked, and acted like a priest, whether or not some guy died and came back from the dead or not. And in other words, I'm a Yank. And if I can't be a Yank without being Catholic, well, I'm Catholic. The Pope holds the moral high ground, so I put the Pope in charge. And now I become a Yank, and I have the grand deduction. I go into the town, and I put curbs on the road. So if you want to be a citizen of the United States, you have to practice virtues. And it spills into home economics, and take it from there. And those are the general rules that get everybody out of poverty. Those are the general rules that get people to have recreation time. All that was after World War II in the United States. All that was being implemented. All they had to do was polish things up, and they couldn't keep it. In the 1970s, when this all came crashing down, they went from home economics to individual rights. And they had reached a fork in the road. All they had to do was to get onto a maintenance level. All they had to do, theirs was a choice to either pig out, to move in the foothills and become the upper class in a peasant and property class society that they created, or to get onto a maintenance level, to make money by making another person better off. And they chose the former, and they threw away the latter. go back and look, they got all the golden real estate they could get in their hands on. They justified their actions by having a sense of social conscience. And their social conscience was completely different from today. They caused people to have to work more hours. They threw out a very fundamental argument of decency as a formal argument. They threw out God. They separated the act of sex from the act of getting the gal pregnant. They threw out a judicial court. And they made money by causing poverty. One of the unforgivable sins in the Bible. They couldn't care less. They just said, that's your religion, not mine. And they went ahead and did it. They caused people to work more hours. And if you look, the people who do the producing, like plumbers and carpenters, they had to start working more and more hours. And now that adjustment is called the consumption society. And they push us in a consumption society. And now we're hitting bottom because of that. All in a very planned thing. Now you're in dire straits. You used to be a gal, you would be called a home economist. You adopted being a mother as a profession, and you had a house to live in, and you owned that house. You had a family budget, and you ran the house a lot like a business. You did the producing, you did all the cooking and cleaning and getting the kids raised, and then you also did the producing, all the thoughts that have to do with sex and the pleasures of sex and those things. That was your department. Once the kids got into school, you had a working life. And once the kids got into school, it was for you to go and play in that silly tennis tournament they have every year. You dropped the kids off, head for the country club, and got a massage by some guy named Bjorg, and played around with the gals and played tennis, and you got to play in that silly tennis tournament. In other words, motherhood was considered a very fundamental profession, and that was a job. And you would have amateur tennis players, for example. Tennis and that sort of thing would be relegated to an amateur. And then you'd come over here and you'd be a good person and get the next generation of kids raised, and everything worked out. And they trashed that. The same is true of the guys. You had to work more and more hours, and you see this house behind me. Well, this is a house I grew up in. Our parents owned it, and he was a repairman, and on that repairman's salary, he could afford to support a wife and children on a 3-bedroom brick house and a half-acre lot. And a couple doors down was a milkman, if you remember who they were, and a plumber and a school teacher and a guy who worked in a feed store up the road. You get the idea. The same people that did the producing did the consuming. And they threw all that out then. They decided that you would be quite happy dropping your kid off if you're a gal and going to work in a factory and producing things for them. And if you're a guy, they decided that you would be quite happy not being able to support a wife and child and renting property from them. A peon is one of the names that they call you. A class of the proletariat is another name. They're just words that have the same meaning. It simply comes, the different attitude comes from the people who are doing the talking. I have other names for those kind of people. I call them the bad guys. That's as polite as it gets. And just so it said, what is home economics? Home economics is when the family unit is built, is considered the basic economic brick. It's the smallest economic thing. Go up to the computer you're listening to this on and take out a transistor. You take out a second transistor, and as you take the third one out, it's no longer a computer, it's a pile of electronic parts. You put that transistor back in, it's back to being a computer, and there you go. Home economics. 10-year-olds can't pay for their moms. Moms can't get the kids raised and head for the factory to make furniture. And the guy can't go to the factory and make furniture and take care of the house and children. And so the mother and dad are viewed as a single unit. And there's so picture a 1950s detached house in the United States that was intentionally designed to do that, to live in, to raise the next generation of children in. And then go off to the side, start with farming and mining, then manufacturing, then wholesale, retail, and repair, and then retirement, education, and recreation. And lawyers and doctors form a kind of lattice that holds it all together. And it's the Catholic priest that causes it all to come into being to begin with. It's actually a Catholic shtick. Being normal and well adjusted is a religious shtick or a Catholic shtick. A normal supply and demand curve is a Catholic shtick. And this is opposed to home economics. So let's go back here. We've had a handful of these live streams now, and we're hoping you'll pass the word and get people to join our gang. If you're listening to this and you're a gal and you're in Los Angeles or Toronto or London, you start speaking up. There's a live chat there, and you start putting numbers to this. This is how much money I make. This is my children. This is how much money I have to come up with to provide for them. And you include a recreation, and then you go back over here. If you were to live in a detached house, how much money is a mortgage? How much money is health insurance? How much is a recreational budget for you? In this society, because the world centers around the priest and the nun, that they center around you, the Yank. It's really not about your kids, and it's about Susie in St. Louis. And if she's going to be a professional mom, then everything centers around Susie. The same is true of the guy. How much is a mortgage? How many hours you have to work? You really don't ask how much money do you make. You ask how many hours you have to work to be a provider. How much is a mortgage? How much is a car wherever you're living? If you're renting property from somebody, well, somebody has to own it, and that we don't do. You don't rent property to other people. You don't rent property from other people. We'll tell Donald Trump to keep his money in the bank, and these other guys, they can start committing the good kind of reparations. They cost you to have to work more hours. They got to commit acts of reparations. They got to make up for this stuff, and that's a completely different world than the world you see on TV today. Let me go back to home economics. Picture a young couple in a house, and he makes enough money to provide for everybody. And well, there's a couple, and they're choosing between, say, buying a couch or buying 2 recliner chairs for their living room. And you go off to the side, and you can see all of the farming, what kind of material they use. If it uses cotton, all the cotton fields that gets planted, and you can see all the mines. You can see all the manufacturing starting to make couches instead of recliner chairs. And you can see all that stores, all the advertising. It's all geared towards getting that couple what they want. And things become quite easy to talk about and quite easy to do. It works fine, lasts a long time. The kicker of it all is you have to practice virtues. And so you have to lay down the law and be quite a dictator. You're as dictatorial as any communist. You're as dictatorial as any fascist. You start to realize that a communist and a fascist are just the same person, whether they call themselves the intelligentsia and put people in housing projects, or they call themselves whatever they call the slumlords, and they put people in apartments. They're the same group, do the same thing. And they're as opposed to our gang. And our gang comes into being because Christ arose on the 3rd day. This will all go up to the Supreme Court. And if you notice, the Supreme Court came out in the 70s and said, we decided there would be absolutely no religion in government. And when they did, they institutionalized pulling a bum's rush, and they institutionalized making money by causing poverty. They actually took the stereotypical, straight out of the definition textbook of a satanic church, which is the complete absence of Christ, of those 3 things that make up God and country: straightening out our emotions, willing the good of another person, and doing it because Christ rose on the third day. That infusion up there, that star in the sky. And so let's go back to you. If you're a gal and you have some children, you've got to start speaking up. This is what I make, and this is what I need if I was going to be a 1950s housewife, to be stereotypical. And this is what I would need in my budget in order to get things done. And from the point of view of the guy, how many hours would you have to work to come up with that budget to make the business run, so to speak? Well, that's it. If you're listening to this, pass the word. We need for you to join the gang and then start typing in. This is what we need. This is what I have to get things done. This is how much health insurance is, and food and clothing, and recreational time for you. This is the budget I need to get everybody out of poverty and into plenty. Home economics. Well, just so it said, we'll try and be on tomorrow at about 11 o'clock California time, and about 7 in the evening London time, and all the places in between. So we hope you'll pass the word. I have to put a qualifier to that. I do so much babysitting that I find that I'm not always able to do that. And I certainly don't mind babysitting. I very much mind the reasons behind it. No one can afford it. No one can afford to get a second job just so they could put their child in a daycare center, just so they can watch somebody else raise their child. And that's the bottom class. The upper class, well, they collect rent from people, and they don't have to work. Their job is consuming. And we'll put a stop. We have to stand up for them. We'll stand up to them by standing up to the good guys. So if you're listening to this, please call in. And don't forget our YouTube channel, The Priest and the Pimp. And don't forget Facebook, Time, and Instagram, Time to Act. And hopefully others. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for taking time out to hear this.